Welcome to the program today. My name is Mondo and I'm here with a prophecy update. And there certainly is a lot going on, which makes the prophecy update worthy. I have the privilege as well of being with Bill Koenig. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Mondo. Great to be with you.
You're like the perfect candidate to discuss this because you have been covering really the geopolitics of Israel for 25 plus years through all the administration. Kind of share a little bit about how people can find you, what you've been doing, and how you communicate with.
Well, I appreciate that, Mondo. We have a website. It's watch.org. It's watch.org. We post news that's biblically relevant 365 days a year. And on Fridays, I put out a weekly news report, the Koenig's Eye View, about 18 to 20 pages of news that happened that week that was relevant, very relevant, biblically relevant. And spent 20 years working out of the White House as a correspondent for our news organization. So I was through the 2 terms of President Bush, the 2 terms of Barack Obama, and the term of President Trump. So it was a great experience. I learned a lot, but our focus has been Israel and the Middle East for a long time. Wrote a book, Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. Also wrote another book, Revealed, Obama's Legacy, that gives an insight on some of the things that he did and how we're paying the price today. So it's an amazing time. And Israel's God's time clock. City of Jerusalem's even more of a time clock. So we're very blessed to be living in a time like this.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that when you think about Scripture and God's intentionality at creating the world, God doesn't do anything by accident. And he put Israel right in the center of what we call today, especially in archaeology, we call it the Levant. Right there on the eastern side of the Mediterranean, really the land bridge between 3 continents. And so, God had put Israel there. And so they had, not only did they have access or temptation religiously from all the various, Egyptian religion, Near Eastern, as well as even the Greek thinking, but just the geopolitics back then. It's like the cycle has returned, and Israel, here we are. We're going to talk about a few things of Israel's prominence. How did this little country of Israel of 9 million people become centralized in this current geopolitical debate and situation? And again, cycles are going back. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
I used to always be amazed at the focus on Israel, the size of New Jersey. As you said, 9 million people living there. And, if there was a suicide bombing in Jerusalem, this was on the front page of almost every major news organization around the world. If there was conflict with Palestinians, same thing. It received the world's focus. At one time, Israel had the second most foreign journalism offices than any other country in the world. It's incredible. Or any other, put it this way, any country. I think it was number 3 after Washington, D.C., New York, and then Jerusalem was number 3. So that gives you an idea how God has allowed this tiny little country that a lot of world leaders believe is the key to world peace. Even the Arab leaders, that's been kind of their mantra, that Israel, if we could only make peace with Israel and the Palestinians, that would bring regional peace, Middle Eastern peace, world peace. So God has allowed it to happen like that. And it's amazing, Mondo, the level of focus Israel receives and are at one of the most precarious times in their history right now.
Mm-hmm. When you think about scripturally, and we have the insight because we have the Bible, we get God's perspective on it. But, Zechariah 12:3 talks about Jerusalem being made or being a burdensome stone to all the nations of the world, and they're going to just struggle with it. But secondly, theologically, we understand, or spiritually in the sense that Satan actively hates the Jews. And so the world, lies under the sway of the wicked one. The nations do. And so it's no surprise that Israel has become the most condemned of all the I would say, United Nations proposals over the years, all the different human rights. And you're like, really? But God just keeps them right at the center, because when the time comes at the end, God once again is going to be speaking to Israel, as we know, with the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. But one of the things that I want to ask Bill today is we got done just watching this really geopolitics webinar of a retired brigadier general and geopolitics expert from Israel. So these are Israelis, and they were given this webinar talking about the importance on how delicate Israel needs to be in handling some of these diplomatic issues. Kind of talk a little bit about that.
Well, it was really great since Russia's obviously got a lot of world attention right now, and they talked about the importance of Israel in a very precarious and difficult time now, is how they handle that relationship with Russia. Israel voted to basically condemn, along with the rest of the world, Russia's actions in the Ukraine, called for a ceasefire and just elimination of that. They've also helped with some defense-oriented equipment. And they also said that what's interesting is a lot of the victims, the Israeli doctors, are the ones that are treating them, the refugees that have moved out of the country into other countries. And they got Israeli doctors all over the world that have come and helped, or come from Israel to help in these situations. So, but I think the thing that we really saw was the importance of that very fragile relationship that Israel has with Russia, and they just bottom line says we have to be very, very careful how we handle this diplomatically, politically. We need their cooperation in dealing with Syria and the Iranian threat in Syria, as well as just our concerns about our future with Iran. So I thought it was very interesting how they're being very careful in this circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, let's paint the scenario here, because we know that in Syria, that Russia has bases. Latakia is right there on the Mediterranean coast. This base has been around for a while, naval. They certainly have a lot of other ships and stuff right there. We know that they've provided weaponry to Syria. We talked a little bit before, the S-300 defenses. And so Russia's entrenched there. And then talk a little bit about what they said about the Golan.
One of the foreign ministers, or it might have been the foreign minister, I didn't catch his name, but this week when Israel was speaking out in defense of the Ukraine, he said, well, Russia, don't support Israel's right to the Golan Heights. And obviously, from a military standpoint, the Golan Heights is about as important as it gets, especially with 150,000 Hezbollah rockets pointed at Israel, and now reported 15,000 Iranian missiles, which are a lot more sophisticated than they have in the past, with direction guidance systems accordingly. But that got Israel's attention. I think they backed off a little bit when they saw that comment. But then again, that's what these folks are talking about. We've got to be careful with Russia. We can't afford to have them on the wrong side of us.
Yeah, let's think about this. Put it in context: is that Israel took the Golan Heights in the Six-Day War after being really goaded into fighting, doing a preemptive strike into Egypt, being surrounded down there, and they took this, and it's become part of sovereign Israel. Even Trump acknowledged the sovereignty that they had over it, and so Israel's super excited about that. So here Israel has they recognize their own integrity of sovereignty, certainly with Palestinian areas, but yet they said, hey, we respect Ukraine's sovereignty from the attacking invader. Well, then Russia turned it, right? And said, well, hey, then if you're gonna, when you guys attacked and took the Golan, it's like, well, that's not, they were acting preemptively in a defensive posture.
Oh, yes,
so it's definitely different, but yet it scared Israel because
it did.
I mean, with Trump saying what he did, that was a great thing, but nobody else has recognized it.
No. And that was, and the other part of the conversation was Putin is really playing to the nationalistic love of Russia. He's playing to that. They think he's going to continue. It's a power move. And the greater the sanctions, the more difficulty for he and his country, the more antagonistic he's going to be. Mm-hmm. So he's not going to back off, and he's been concerned about the Western movement of Western nations, NATO moving closer to the borders of his country, as well as former Soviet Union countries, and he is going to really test the world order right now. And it's going to be not the normal world order. It's going to be more problematic or disruptive with China. Mm-hmm. She really brought out that relationship that China and Russia have. And also the fact that they're getting much more involved in the Middle East. And with the United States kind of being in a weak position right now with our administration, that Israel's hoping that the United States won't bail out of the Middle East because they, and then again, she was talking about how challenging it is right now for Israel to have relations and political relationships with Russia, China, and the United States. And they're having to be extremely careful not to irritate Russia and China. And at the same time, we'll worry about this weak administration and what are they going to do? Russia and China have really made a move on the Middle East over the last 10 years. They work Russia is very good at working the social networks. The Chinese TikTok social networks has worked its way into Israel, even helped stir up some of the problem and division between the Israelis and Palestinians during this last conflict with Hamas. And China has big oil and gas relations with the Saudis, with Iran. They have a $40 billion oil exploration deal with Iran. The big players inside of Iraq are Russia and China inside the Iraqi oil fields. Exxon's, I think, is bailed out now completely. Chevron, I believe, is out. If not out, they're getting out. So you're going to have Russian, Chinese oil companies are going to benefit from the Iraqi oil, which is one of the largest deposits in the world, Iraq's deposits. So the whole Middle East is getting much more difficult and also worrisome for the Israelis as far as that relationship they've developed with these Sunni countries. One of the retired general said that his worry is that Iran is in an attempt to develop a better relationship with the Sunnis, and these Sunni countries that have developed a good relationship with Israel might move away from that relationship and move to Iran's side. That's one that really bothers us, Mondo, and I know it does you as well. It's just, that's a very problematic relationship. And Israel might be left alone.
I'm glad, that's exactly where I wanted to go, because one of the things you could hear from these two, they're Israelis, they love their country, but they also, she said very clearly, and we've seen this, that they've known through history, especially modern history, that they have to be able to handle it alone. And so talk, if you will, a little bit about that feeling, especially after the debacle in Afghanistan, about Israel. Can they trust the United States?
Well, that's a big problem. I mean, the Israelis, when Obama did the deal with Iran, the Sunni allies in the Middle East said, we don't trust them. We can't trust the United States like we used to. And the enemies don't fear them, and the allies don't trust them. And that's what forced these Sunnis into a closer, more important defense and intel relationship with Israel, just because of their own survival.
Because again, Iran is the common enemy. They're an enemy to Israel, and they're also an enemy to Saudi Arabia. So
that's right.
The enemy of my enemies, they becoming friendly for that reason. And the United States, Obama made with the JCPOA thing, that treaty, they made Iran strong. And so now you have them needing to come work together because they can't trust the U.S., right?
Yeah, absolutely. The saying from people in the Middle East that know, they believe that if Iran got into a conflict with Saudi-led Sunnis, they would be the first to be nuked, not Israel. That blood is, over the years and over the centuries, is so bad. But Iran and Turkey aren't real excited about this Abraham Accord that Israel has with 4 or 5 small Arab countries. They've never been at war with Bahrain and United Arab Emirates and Sudan. They've never been in a conflict with them. But there's a situation right now that, if the Sunnis come alongside the Shiite led by Iran, and Israel becomes isolated, and what you're alluding to, Mondo, here is the gentleman, the general, and the think tank leader, she, as well as he, was very concerned to the point that Israel has to get stronger. I mean, Israel's strong right now with the F-35s, with the nukes that they have, with the intel they have. They have everything monitored throughout the Middle East. They know everything that's going on. They're inside of Iran, but they know that they have to get stronger because they're concerned. Getting stronger to the point that they won't have to rely on anybody, Russia, China, especially the United States, or these Sunni allies, that they have to now get stronger and stronger because they're a tiny little country that could be taken out pretty quick. Tel Aviv, Haifa, Jerusalem with a couple nukes. And so that's, this is Bible prophecy playing out right before our eyes.
I mean, it's interesting too that when you think about what Israel is doing in Syria, they've had relative freedom to bomb silos, weapon factories that Iran is, as a proxy putting in there. And so they've had basically air freedom and air supremacy truly over Syria. And so, but Russia, they will tell Russia, because Russia has troops there, right? They'll say, hey, we're going to be doing this. And so they kind of tip them off. And so far, Russia hasn't given them the advanced S-400, anti-aircraft. So if they offend Russia too much, Russia might say, no more airstrikes. And that would be tremendously disadvantageous for Israel's security in the Golan, right?
That's a fine line that they're dealing with, where Netanyahu had a very good relationship with Putin. And if there was problems, he'd either get on the phone or get on a plane and be there in 24 hours. And they had a really good working relationship. Some of the intel people in Israel are concerned that Bennett, the prime minister, or their foreign minister, Lapid, don't have the same kind of relationship with Putin that's necessary. And also Iran, Russia does not want Iran to turn Syria into another Yemen. So that's why they've given them some flexibility in terms of these airstrikes you're talking about. But Russia, for the most part, wants to be in the loop and approve these and not have Israel be able to just arbitrarily go in at any time and take these weapons out. So, and we look at Isaiah 17:1, the day that Damascus will no longer exist as a city. I think of that often.
Let's talk about one last topic in this update, in that what is the red line that Israel has as it relates to this revived, what Biden is trying to do, and to revive the agreement with Iran? What's Israel's red line? What do you envision happening there? You're not a prophet, I understand, but let's conjecture a little bit and just kind of throw some thoughts.
Well, unfortunately, Mondo, and you and I have watched this. This agreement, Iran's basically getting everything they want. They're going to be able to enrich uranium much quicker, possibly even down to a week or two. There's a lot we don't know inside of Iran. The other thing is Trump, in their negotiations after they got out of that Iran nuclear deal, they were to get rid of their missiles and rockets that put all these U.S. allies in the Middle East at risk. They're going to keep all those. And the Iranian leader, one of the negotiators, is acting with a lot of bravado. He said the tough decision now is up to the Americans. They're going to have to make a tough decision if they want to do this deal or not. I mean, we're moving completely out of a position of strength that we had with Trump into a position of weakness. And the strange irony is we're concerned about the 600,000 barrels a day that we get from Russia, to the extent it's motivated Biden and his administration to see the 1.5 million to 2 million barrels of Iranian oil put back on the global market, which would help the price of crude oil in America. Well, we have all we need in Texas and Wyoming, North Carolina, New Mexico, North Dakota, Louisiana. We have plenty. So how ironic is that? But that's where we are right now, and they see Biden and his administration. They know exactly how weak they are, and they're going to take that, use that for their advantage. And unfortunately, it's probably going to work. Yeah,
I mean, so here again we have Jesus himself. I love it. Mark 13:37 tells us to be watching, which we are. We see Israel put at the center, and I think God does that for theological reasons, to keep his people there, to keep his promises, right? He says that he brought them back in Ezekiel 37, and even into 38 with the Gog-Magog war. He does it because of his great name, his desire to protect his glory. And so, here we have the flag up here, but Israel, this little country, you said size of New Jersey. Any final thoughts on what's happening this week? I know it changes every day, but...
Well, it's I love that, because it's the center of God's redemptive plan for the world. That tiny little country named Israel, that major city, Jerusalem. And when I talk to Jewish and even Arab friends, I said, you've heard of Armageddon? They go, oh yeah, I've heard of Armageddon. I said, that's a final battle for Jerusalem? And they go, really? I said, let me explain. So it's a great chance for me to explain and then talk about the fact our Messiah, Jesus Christ, will be returning to Jerusalem to begin his earthly reign. and the significance of Jerusalem, and it's a powerful way. So this is what we need to do today, is not miss these opportunities to lead people to what the Scriptures say, and most importantly, to their hope and salvation in Jesus Christ.
Amen. Well, Bill, appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mondo.
And I hope you guys keep watching, because Bill and I filmed a couple other programs which will be coming out relatively soon, and you'll see those. But we wanted to do another update on a different topic related to some of the intelligence that's coming out of Israel. So we appreciate you watching. Keep watching with us. It's exciting to see the Lord moving. And as always, we have hope and faith and trust. God is in control. We're not here to pander fear, but certainly to encourage faith. And we'll see you next time.